What is wrong with Frankenstein? From the very beginning of the film, we're told that there's something wrong about him in the music. What is wrong with Frankenstein? Is it because he's socially transgressive? Is he sexually transgressive? Is he violent? Is he evil? He's a strange mixture of indeterminate evils, really, because Peter Cushing's approach to this character was not one that was evil. He once did say, when someone said, "Oh, you were very evil in that film, saw you on TV last night," he said, "No, I wasn't. There's no evil in Frankenstein. He's just a dedicated doctor." Now, I think it's difficult to support that view in Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. He's definitely nasty in that one. But in the other ones, I think he was onto something. He's not necessarily overtly evil, but there seems to be something wrong with him. And I think that's because he doesn't fit into society in various ways. James Bernard, who wrote the music for this, made quite sure that we know there's something wrong with him by including the signifier of evil, the tritone, or the augmented fourth, or the devil in music, or whatever you want to call it, in his main theme, which comes up right at the beginning, which, like so many of James's musical themes, echoes the syllables of the film's title, Frankenstein Created Woman. So you can hear the syllables of the title in that, plus the tritones, which create this sense of him being somehow wrong. There's one there and one there. So we're on edge. We don't know quite how to look at this elegant, attractive, charming, but unnerving character. I think the music really does convey that rather wonderfully. Of course, he's pitted against society. He is an outsider figure, although he may not be an antagonistic one, particularly in this film. And the society is represented in the music by timpani. And what James Bernard does rather interestingly is to create chords and intervals with differently tuned timps. The person who'd famously done this before in the 19th century was Berlioz, who created chords out of timpanis in his Symphonie Fantastique to create the sound of thunder. And James signifies society with timpani. So you get these sort of effects in the drums during the opening execution where the guillotine is shown. He's setting up the tension between society and the individual right at the beginning. We also see, right at the beginning, Hans, the Robert Morris character, as a young boy who comes to see his father being guillotined by accident. He has his own theme, which sounds like this. That's interesting because it's related to the theme that James gives Christina. Her theme is this. Now, the opening notes of that form a minor triad, a minor chord. If you reverse Hans's theme, it's almost the same. It would be the same if you raised the last note by a semitone. So he's actually very cleverly united the theme for Hans with Christina, which is exactly what happens in the story. They come together in one body. So he's anticipating all this very carefully in the music and using the music to help tell the story in a rather brilliant way. Frankenstein is also in Christina. His influence is very much part of her personality, or becomes part of her personality. So during the main title sequence, we hear Christina's theme blended with Frankenstein's sinister tritone theme. A wonderful clash which creates a sense of anxiety, but you can hear in the music that the two are intimately connected. This film is also really rather a domestic affair. Actually, only The Evil of Frankenstein has a castle and a big lab set in it. All the other Frankenstein films, probably because of budgetary requirements, are fairly modest in the size of the environments in which they take place. This is perhaps the most modest. Frankenstein's laboratory in this film is in the back of an ordinary house. And a lot of the action takes place in a cafe, a perfectly ordinary cafe. So it is a domestic environment. And this lab that he's set up is an improvised affair. Frankenstein has no money, so he's dependent on Dr. Hertz to bail him out. So it's all rather a sort of makeshift affair. So we hear music to suggest the first experiment, which sounds like this. Which in itself is rather spare. James was very good at not doing too much. That creates all the tension and anxiety of this opening experiment with very few notes. Frankenstein is revealed. He's experimenting on himself, interestingly, here. He's died, but he's found a way of keeping his soul in his body. So his theme introduces the reveal. He's got his hands in front of his face, his gloved hands in front of his face. And then James will bring in vibraphones, which creates a wonderfully ambivalent, unnerving quality. You know that this is Frankenstein because you've seen the previous films by this stage, but he's managing to create this sense of ambivalence. What's he up to? What kind of a character is he? He seems perfectly pleasant, but at the same time there's something wrong with him. He's revived by electric shocks, and for this all James requires are trills, which are synchronized with the action. Simplicity itself, but it's absolutely brilliant because that's all you need, and these are the characteristic fingerprints, I think, of James. Simplicity, but hugely effective. So Christina has this very sad theme, and James always tried to put in lyrical romantic moments in his scores, and in this instance he managed to have quite a bit of it because Christina's on screen quite a bit of the time. So she has this very sad little theme in a minor key, and she's talking, when we hear this particular version of the theme, to Hans, who is also this another outsider. They're both in love with each other, but they don't quite know how to proceed. They're very sympathetic to each other. And they mention the fact that Hans is working for the Baron. And as soon as the word the Baron appears, the music starts to change. And we go into this chord, which is very troubling. It's technically known as a diminished seventh chord, but it doesn't really belong in any key. So suddenly you're harmonically disorientated. And James is very good at doing this. It just underscores the sense of unease. And then you'll hear the Frankenstein theme come back. Christina is tormented by the three chaps in the cafe. Hans comes to the rescue, but before he can do that, she's been humiliated. They make her serve wine. They know she's going to spit it because her hands are unsteady and she can't walk properly, and they do it to torment her. And again, James is very good at emphasizing the tension with a very simple device. So we have her theme, but he uses a viola, which is a rather melancholy timbre anyway, just to do this trill under the theme. Again, it's really simple, but it conveys all the anxiety. You know it's going to be awful. You know it's going to end in sadness. And the viola is telling you that all the way through. Then, when Hans visits Christina after this awful incident and tries to comfort her, they have a little love theme together. And he remembers his own father. Says, "Oh, I remember him being a jolly kind of fellow. We went for walks in the country." And again, James is able to create an amazing, it's almost Proustian really, this idea of remembering the past by using an oboe, which is an instrument of great pastoral connotations. And we have Hans's little theme played on an oboe. It's really, really simple, but it conjures up an image of Hans as a young man with his father in the countryside. Very, very simple. And then it gets to the romantic moment where he says, I love you, Christina. So they have this wonderful love scene together, and brilliantly, James is uniting both their themes. So we get Christina, and we have Hans, and together they create it's very like what Wagner does, actually. Just out of interest, in Wagner's opera Die Walküre, the two lovers have their own little themes. So Siegmund has this theme. And Sieglinde has... And when they get together, the tunes come together. So he's being very Wagnerian, really, in his own simple way. The three aristocratic cads in the restaurant are interested in Christine, and they torment her, I think, because they need to reinforce their own sense of their own masculinity. Masculinity is a construct that needs constant repair. After all, there is a theory that we all start off as female in the womb. This is a complex subject, but I think it's quite interesting that they should want to torment Christina. They are in themselves somewhat ambivalent, I think, about their own identity, and she helps reinforce that. And they do that in this rather nasty way. I think all misogyny, largely, is a way of reinforcing an image of masculinity. Don Giovanni seduces women in order to bolster up his own insecurities, I think. So there's that going on there. Certainly when they kill the landlord, this is another way of emphasizing their own masculinity. And it's very brutal. And James emphasizes it with these clashing discords when the landlord is killed. Incidentally, the landlord, played by Alan McNaughton originally, I think, had a kind of Middle European accent to match Susan Denberg's Austrian accent. But then they redubbed Susan Denberg, and so Alan McNaughton had to redub his lines into a more English kind of standard delivery. But that's another story. The key scene is when the soul of Hans is captured, and you see this wonderful sphere of light, which is somehow managed to be imprisoned within a force field. I remember talking to James Bernard about this and said, how did you know the kind of sound effect you wanted would work? And he said, well, I didn't. I just hoped it would. And he has come up with an amazing effect to create this mystical quality, which is very important to its overall effect. James was not a great fan of avant-garde style and serial and atonal music, but he often used those techniques in his films when they were dramatically justified. So to create this effect, he has strings playing in a fairly high register, and they're playing harmonics, which create this rather strange bell-like quality. It doesn't work on the piano, but basically what they are doing is this sort of arpeggio figure. But in harmonics on strings, that sounds very ghostly. He also has vibraphones doing this, and then doing this as well. And all that blending together creates this amazingly mystical effect of a soul. It's only a few bars long, but it's one of the most wonderful musical moments, I think, in a Hammer film. Fantastically inventive. This film is really about gender bending. It's ahead of its time. I mean, nowadays we're happy to talk about that kind of thing and support it, as we rightly should. If you want to change your gender, that's okay. In those days, I think it was really rather a disturbing idea that a man could become a woman or a woman could become a man. And usually in these films, any transgression, any gender transgression, is regarded as something undesirable and rather worrying. So if you think of Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, she's not a benign character. When Dr. Jekyll turns into a woman, he becomes bad. If you think of Hands of the Ripper, when the girl, played by Angharad Rees, is is sort of taken over by her father's spirit, and he's Jack the Ripper, she becomes bad. So she's not staying within the bounds of her original gender. This is worrying. I think also there is unfortunately the tendency in a lot of films of this time, and Hammer were no exception, that if you become gay, if you become homosexual, you're also rather worrying. The vampire lovers, for instance, these are lesbian vampires. This is something that's rather worrying. Interestingly, that film was done, I think, from the point of view of a specifically heterosexual male gaze. So you can see all these naked women for the first time, really. They're lesbians, so they're not going to be interested in you, but at the same time, you're interested in them. So it's a bit complicated. But nonetheless, there's a sort of censure going on there. There is an interesting moment in Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde when Dr. Jekyll, he's back as Ralph Bates in a particular scene. He meets Howard, the man who lives above him, who's fallen in love with Sister Hyde. And he doesn't realise that Sister Hyde is also Dr. Jekyll. And Dr. Jekyll is sort of half in touch with Sister Hyde, although he's back in his normal shape. She's still in his head, and he reaches out and touches Howard and says, Howard. And Howard is rather upset by this. It's a little gay moment, which is played for laughs, really. But at the same time, it is suggesting that that's not what you should be. So there is a censorious nature going on here in the gender bending. And I think in Frankenstein Created Woman, Christina is a worrying figure because she's both male and female. She has both of these characteristics. When she is transformed, her hunchback and her disfigurement are removed by Frankenstein. So she becomes this blonde, doll-like creature with a man's soul in her, which is distinctly, we're meant to feel is distinctly worrying. And James does respond to this in an interesting way by playing her theme, but by adding an extra beat. The theme is originally in 4 beats in the bar, a nice symmetrical arrangement. Here, we have 5 beats in the bar, so it does sound just that little bit different. Sounds lovely, but that extra beat just gives it a slight asymmetry, which I think rather brilliantly matches this beautiful but very ambivalent look of Susan Denberg, who's this angelic demon. And I think that is very much connected with the ambivalence generally about gender swapping in this film. It's a rather profound issue, which the film probably isn't aware that it's raising to such an extent, but it's something one could talk about a great deal. Thorley Walters was brought in for comedy, really, light relief. He plays a sort of Dr. Watson figure in this film, helping Frankenstein with his experiments. But there is one moment where he becomes quite serious, and he's trying to tell Christina, who's now been turned into this doll-like perfect creature, how amazing Frankenstein is, what a rather frighteningly amazing person he is. He can perform miracles, and indeed you can't get more of a miracle than transplanting a soul. And again, this is very Wagnerian. I always think of Wagner's Lohengrin. It's very like it. There's an evil character, a sorceress called Ortrud in Wagner's Lohengrin. And if I get the score out, I'll just play you her music. James was actually more interested in Verdi than in Wagner, but I think he was influenced nonetheless. So there is this theme which he uses for Ortrud. Now, if you listen to the moment where Thorley Walters, Dr. Hertz, is telling Christina about Frankenstein, you get a very similar feeling. It really does convey the ambivalence, the magic, the supernatural power that Frankenstein has at his command. Christina is presented as an example of monstrous femininity. She lies in wait to try and destroy, or she succeeds in destroying the three men, ostensibly because they are responsible for Hans's murder. He's put up for the murder, he's innocent, the three men have done it, so the soul within Christina is getting its revenge, but on another level it's a woman doing her own thing and acting independently. So she is a kind of serial killer. Serial killers became a much more popular theme in the 1970s. But again, Hammer were ahead of the game, and we have a female serial killer, which is even more interesting. And this breaks a lot more taboos. There is also a rather wonderful moment where she digs up the severed head of Hans, whose soul is in her body, and she puts this head on a mirror in her bedroom and worships it. And we hear Hans's theme in this very brief shot that we get of the severed head, played up in a high register to make it sound rather shrill and frightening. Severed heads are psychological symbols of castration. So there's a sort of castration fear going on here too. She's becoming far too powerful. The powerful woman can threaten a man in that way as well. And at the very end of the film, she runs off. And James, again, is very economical, but very consistent. He has little Hans's theme doing an ostinato. That's actually his theme. He speeds it up. And he has Christina's theme on the top of it. And on it goes for a very, very long time during this chase sequence. So it's not just her, it's Hans. She and Hans are escaping. She is man and woman. And that is something that is a very worrying concept.